It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by HP. Whenever you do your best thinking, the HP Spectre X360 is ready when inspiration strikes. With power save for battery life and focus mode to multitask, you can do your best thinking whenever and wherever it happens. The HP Spectre X360 2-in-1 convertible PC with Windows 10 saves battery life for whenever an idea hits you. HP Spectre X360, a more thoughtful laptop.
All right, guys, you are Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we are talking about the big news as Falcon players report to training camp on Tuesday and answering your listener questions.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong, however, on Twitter at FalcFans, and, of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And before we get started on today's Locked On Falcons episode, where we talk about the Falcons players reporting, we got a couple of players that tested positive for COVID. We'll talk a little bit about that, and we answer many questions about Madden ratings. You get a rant on that. Who will be the Falcons' most improved player? We'll get some chicken wing questions here on this Wing Wednesday, sort of including what flavor of chicken wing Matt Ryan would be. We'll talk a little bit about Simone Biles and what's going on with her, and sort of how we can sort of measure the improvement made by the Falcons defense this upcoming season. But before we get into all of that, I do want to let you guys know about the live NBA draft show that is coming up later this week, where NBA draft GOAT Chad Ford, Locked On NBA Draft host Rafael Barlow, and Locked On NBA host John Corrales will be live this year covering the 2021 NBA Draft. It's the Locked On NBA Draft 2021 show, brought to you by Built Bar. Get local expert analysis on every pick, including from my good buddy Locked On Hawks host Brad Rowland, by following the Locked On NBA on YouTube today, and watch the live coverage this Thursday on July 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern. So let's jump into sort of the news of the day involving the Falcons, and nothing major in terms of coming out Tuesday as players began reporting in. We didn't necessarily get an update on what Matt Gano's status is, or as well as other players like Calvin Ridley, in terms of players that we expect to be dealing with some injuries that might wind up on sort of the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. That PUP is what the PUP list is. Maybe we'll get that update tomorrow or later this week. Probably the only interesting tidbit that sort of emerged as players were talking to media on Tuesday as they were reporting was that Michael Walker has put on about 15 pounds, bulked up from about 224 pounds to 240 pounds, according to various reports. And that's only interesting to me because it kind of triggered me, because I remember the last time the Falcons had a rookie edge rusher that was playing apparently in the 220s and then had to put on 10, 15 pounds to get up into the upper 230s or 240s going into this second year with the expectation that he would be improved. And obviously, I'm not necessarily comparing Michael Walker to that player. If you know, but it certainly triggered me because I'm like, I don't like undersized edges, but we'll see how that fares out for Michael Walker moving forward. But again, in part due to the fact that Michael Walker will be doing what that player should have been doing throughout his NFL career, and basically being a Sam linebacker and not a pass rusher. I don't think it will have as negative a detrimental effect to Michael Walker's career as it did to that one particular player. And if you don't know who I'm talking about Vic Beasley. But, the other sort of big news that came out Tuesday on a more serious note is that the Falcons put 4 players on the reserve COVID-19 list, presumably with positive tests. I saw Tom Pelissero of NFL Network saying that 14 or 15 players went on the reserve COVID list on Tuesday, and 14 of those players had positive tests. So not, high probability that these 4 players for the Falcons had positive tests, and not necessarily contact tracing that led to their being placed on the reserve COVID list. And, we'll see how it fares for these guys, and maybe it depends on if some of these guys are vaccinated. As you know, you can still test positive for COVID if you are vaccinated on these sort of entry things, but the vaxxed players will not be tested nearly as much as the non-vax players. And last year we saw players that went on the COVID reserve list on average about 9 to 10 days. And so we'll see if that impacts players like Lee Smith, John Atkins, Kobe Jones, and Willie Wright, the 4 players that tested positive. Lee Smith stands out of this group just because, I made a joke last week that it is notable that a lot of Buffalo Bills players have been very prominently anti-vax, this offseason or these last couple of months. And of course, Lee Smith's most recent team was Buffalo. So we'll see if he's sort of in that same category or whatnot in terms of being anti-vax or whatever the case may be. I just thought that was notable that, another Buffalo player getting COVID. Hopefully those guys will have a speedy recovery and hopefully won't miss more than a few days of practice. Obviously, I think Lee Smith's roster spot is relatively safe. Not necessarily the case for players like John Atkins and Kobe Jones and Willie Wright, all of whom are fighting for roster spots, and certainly will give some of the guys in those competitions at nose tackle, at outside linebacker, and along the interior offensive line a leg up should those guys be sidelined to practice for a week plus. So with that being said, we will sort of jump into our Q&A portion of today's episode, kicking things off on which player is going to make the biggest leap heading into this upcoming season. But before we get there, guys, I do want to plug Bet Online, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Bet Online gives you the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, and all your UFC and MMA action. And of course, there's no time like today to get started at Bet Online. Of course, you can bet on the Summer Olympics. You got football season right around the corner. And of course, baseball season is in full swing. You can track all the action at Bet Online. You can get real-time updated odds and props on almost anything you imagine, whether it's how many receiving yards Calvin Ridley will have, if Kyle Pitts will be the offensive rookie of the year, or you want to get in on some of this NBA draft action later this week with some props there. Of course, you could do so at BetOnline. Just head over to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today at betonline.ag. Use the promo code LOCKEDON and you'll receive a 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. That means if you deposit $200, you get $100 in free money to play with that promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
A big trade shakes up the NBA draft. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. Let's start in college football, where reports are that the SEC will meet on Thursday to discuss adding the Oklahoma Sooners and Texas Longhorns. Today on Locked On Sooners, USA Today's John Williams takes you inside the meetings that Oklahoma had with their current conference, the Big 12. The Green Bay Packers continue to try and persuade Aaron Rodgers to return to the team, reportedly coming to terms on a number of concessions meant to entice the reigning NFL MVP. Our local expert in Green Bay, Peter Bukowski, has that and the latest on talks with star wide receiver Davante Adams. The Memphis Grizzlies have moved up in the NBA draft, acquiring the 10th overall pick from the New Orleans Pelicans. For more details on the deal, listen to our local expert in Memphis, Sean Coleman, on today's Locked On Grizzlies podcast. And for full live coverage of the NBA draft, subscribe to the Locked On NBA YouTube channel and tune in to Locked On NBA Draft 2021 on July 29th. Local experts on the biggest stories. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So our first question comes from @Padre1013 on Twitter. He asks, which returning player do you feel is going to have the biggest leap in their level of play this upcoming season? So obviously this is something we've talked about a number of times this offseason, and, always sort of point out the 2020 draft class, the 2019 draft class, those guys going in year 2, year 3, you're expecting significant leaps for several of those players, including players like Marlon Davidson, Matt Hennessy, A.J. Terrell, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, John Kaminsky, etc. You can even throw 2018 draft class players. We're expecting Calvin Ridley to sort of solidify himself as a top 10 wide receiver. Expectation that Russell Gage will show himself to be more than just a sort of typical number 3 wide receiver. And Foye Olukun, after flashing a lot in his first year as a full-time starter in 2020. Can he be more consistent? Can he show those same flashes and be a little bit more consistent with those flashes in 2021? And you can even throw in players like Deion Jones, Jake Matthews. We haven't seen Jake Matthews be, a high-level run blocker since 2017 when the Falcons were last really committed to the outside zone scheme. Will he get that back? Deion Jones coming off a down year. So there's any number of candidates that we hope are going to be, some of the more improved players, and any one of those guys you could rattle off if you believe in it. But if you're asking me which player I would be most willing to bet on, over at betonline.ag or whatever the case may be, for who I think is going to make significant improvement, Matt Ryan would be my choice. And this goes back to something I discussed on last week's quarterback camp preview, until we talked about Matt Ryan basically benefiting from, an increase in play action. And essentially, if you have Matt Ryan performing on average of what he has performed when he's been utilized on play action passing over the last 6 years, and you just dial that up, he ran play action on about 26% of his plays last year. And you look at how often Arthur Smith used play action in Tennessee, at a minimum 31% over the last 2 years. You just dial up from 26 to 31%. You should see Matt Ryan having one of the better seasons he's had, and probably, based off of certain metrics like adjusted net yards per attempt, the third best season of his NFL career this upcoming season, and a type of season that should, and I don't think this is being, very hyperbolic or overly optimistic when I say this, but a quarterback that should be in the top 7 to 10 range as a quarterback, and that doesn't necessarily require Arthur Smith's ability to dial up play action being significantly better than what we've seen from people like Dirk Cutter and Steve Sarkisian, and more on the spectrum of what we saw, in sort of Matt Ryan's better years running play action in 2016 under Kyle Shanahan and whatnot. So, Arthur Smith doesn't have to be even a real genius as far as designing up play action play. He just needs to dial it up a little bit more, 5% more, and you should see a significant jump for Matt Ryan. So I feel like that's a very conservative guess. That's why I sit here and I say, like, of anybody who I know is good and I know, has a large body of work that says that they should be significantly better this upcoming season, Matt Ryan to me would be the best bet. Obviously, that's not a slam dunk guarantee. Any number of variables and unknowns could, derail those expectations, whether it's the running game, the offensive line, Arthur Smith's play calling, durability, defense, all these various factors. So we'll see how that plays out. But I do feel like Matt Ryan is as good a bet as anybody to, have one of the bigger rebound and improved seasons this upcoming season. So our next question comes from the dude at the dude order. He has mental health keeping world's greatest gymnast out of the Olympics. What happened to the Kerry Strug type? So, I don't have a lot of thoughts on Simone Biles. I hope she does whatever she needs to do to be better. But I would sort of draw a hard line in the dude order in sort of what it seems to be that you're implying, and you're sort of assuming, the issues that Kerry Strug had to overcome was a sprained ankle. That was an issue of pain tolerance. That was an issue, that's something that you can take a shot for. Mental health is not something that is something that you can magically cure, right? That's, Kerry Strug's issues were physical endurance, not, and I know some people have been trying to frame the Simone Biles things as like mental toughness and mental fortitude, and that's not what mental health is. I don't know what's going on with Simone Biles, which is part of the reason why I don't feel comfortable truly commenting on it, whether she's overstressed, overworked, she's not feeling great, whatever the case may be. So these are two very different things, and to sort of lump these two people and compare and contrast these two people, and to try to sit here and suggest and imply that Kerry Strug was somehow tough because she was able to make an incredible vault on a sprained ankle, a severely sprained ankle, and Simone Biles is not, simply because of whatever the reasons are that she is bowing out of the Olympics. I just feel like is not a great place to be, the dude order. So I would recommend you revise some of your thoughts on that. But we'll move forward and talk about a little less serious of a topic and talk about chicken wings on this Wing Wednesday. And our first question about chicken wings comes from Randy Williams at Randy Williams on Twitter. He asks, lemon pepper or buffalo? And for me, I don't live in Atlanta, and I imagine in Atlanta, it's always going to be lemon pepper, because I know Atlanta is a city that is famous for their lemon pepper wings. And there's a certain standard that I think you have to have in terms of your lemon pepper to be a successful chicken wing business in the city of Atlanta. But I don't think that necessarily exists in the rest of the world. And for a long time in my life, I wasn't a huge fan of lemon pepper wings. It's only really in the last couple of years, in the last 4 or 5 years, where I've become a much bigger fan of them. Again, not from Atlanta, don't live in Atlanta, so therefore I haven't quite truly experienced the Atlanta lemon pepper wing. But elsewhere in the country, lemon pepper is very hit and miss. And I've only learned to really appreciate lemon pepper in recent years, because I have learned a better way to make a more consistent and delicious lemon pepper wing myself. But when I go to various businesses and order lemon pepper, they're very hit and miss. And so from that perspective, if I was ordering a wing, again, outside the city limits of Atlanta, I would probably veer towards Buffalo, simply because it's it's not near impossible, but it's hard to mess up a Buffalo wing. It's just basically butter, Frank's Red Hot, maybe some garlic, pepper, or whatever the case may be. And that's really it. And that's your classic Buffalo wing. And you can pretty much do that with your eyes closed and get it consistent, or at least you should be able to get it consistent. I've had some questionable Buffalo wings over the years. So, while I think lemon pepper is the better flavor, if you're asking me, am I much more willing to try someone, I will go to places and try their lemon pepper to see if they actually have good lemon pepper nowadays. But I often am disappointed in that regard, again, outside of the city limits of Atlanta in the rest of the country, the contiguous non-Atlanta portions of the United States. Buffalo is probably a little bit more reliable and more consistent, a go-to flavor over lemon pepper. But I'm sure many of the Georgia listeners, as well as I'm sure some of you, have some great lemon peppers where you guys live, and you say lemon pepper all day. But that's my opinion. Generational tweeter at only1JJ22 on Twitter asks, if Matt Ryan was a wing, what flavor would he want to be covered in? Well, I'm sure because Matt Ryan has lived in Atlanta for almost 15 years, which is probably nearly as long as he's lived any other place on the planet, being quote unquote true to Atlanta, he would probably choose lemon pepper as the flavor that he would want to be covered in. But, if you're asking me what flavor sort of embodies Matt Ryan, it would probably be like a mild buffalo wing. Matt Ryan, again, after spending 5 minutes talking about why I think Matt Ryan's going to be improved, this is not meant to bash Matt Ryan, but he's kind of boring. He's kind of mild. He's kind of plain, and I think that's part of the reason why he gets as much grief from some people as he does. There's no sex appeal when it comes to Matt Ryan. There's no sex appeal to his game. There's no sex appeal to his personality. And it's, I think, easy for people to overlook him in that regard. I know other people have other opinions on why Matt Ryan gets quote unquote constantly disrespected. I've seen people relate that to sort of racism or whatever the case may be. I don't really buy into it. I'm sure there is a element of that amongst some individuals, but I think for the most part, I have always felt like the sort of propensity of Falcon fans to sort of act like Matt Ryan gets a especially high level of grief that other quarterbacks don't get. I've never really bought into that. I've watched, time and time again, I've compared this to Tony Romo. Whenever Tony Romo had a bad game, it was a national story for 4 days on SportsCenter or on whatever network was for, the next 4 days. And it was one of those things where, like, when you have had as much success as Matt Ryan has had, any quarterback that has had as much success as he has had for 10 plus years in the NFL and has 0 rings to show for it gets a comparable level of grief. This is not unique to Matt Ryan. So I think I've always felt that sort of idea that, woe is me and no one respects Matt Ryan, and it's especially egregious when it comes to Matt Ryan, is not a fair and accurate assessment. But that being said, we will sort of leave that at that, and we will talk about what ways we can measure the improvement from the Falcons defense this upcoming season under Dean Pease, as well as go on a little bit of a rant about Madden ratings and why Grady Jarrett got snubbed and why no one seems to care about Julio Jones getting snubbed as much as they did a year ago. And so you'll get a little bit of a rant from me. I won't go too deep on it as I am wont to do, but we'll get into that coming up on today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But before we get there, I do want to plug the national shows here on the Locked On Podcast Network. As training camps kick off, there's a lot of news to catch up on. And of course, I got you covered on all things Falcons. But what about the other 31 teams? And of course, you can check out the Peacock and Williamson podcast, the Locked On NFL podcast, and even the 2 draft-related shows in the Locked On NFL Draft podcast and the Draft News podcast that will cover various big league news around the league for the other 31 NFL teams, including the Falcons. And then you can subscribe to them all on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. So guys, did you know that Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market, has 9 delicious flavors? Whether you're a fan of mint brownie, cookies and cream, cherry barcia, double chocolate, salted caramel, coconut, raspberry, or limited summertime flavors like orange and strawberry. You also have had grasshopper cookie, German chocolate cake, toffee almond come out this summer, and you can check them all out with a mix box, and you'll want to get that healthy snack that tastes just like a candy bar that has none of the guilt. Built bars contain 100% real chocolate. They're soft and easy to chew. My favorite, the coconut almond, which is not offered right now, tastes just like an Almond Joy, but the double chocolate tastes just like a Hershey's bar. Of course, highly recommend the combination of strawberry and chocolate. That is a game changer for the Built bars. But it's not just about Built Bar's great taste. It's about their healthy value too. Again, none of the guilt because they're low in sugar and calories. They're high in protein and fiber. And all you got to do to take advantage of this is head over to BuiltBar.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your first order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. So legends never die. At only Mr. Lindley on Twitter asks, what would you consider a successful defense from Dean Pease in 2021, more so from ranking important advanced metrics like pressure rate and completion percentage against? Now, in general, my expectations for Dean Pease is something in the middle of the pack, somewhere in that like 12 to 20 range is ideal. Again, I don't have high expectations for things. Obviously, you want to be better than that. But, I'm not going to necessarily put those expectations on Dean Pease moving forward. To me, one of the big questions I've had for this defense upcoming this season, and this has been a topic of discussion that we frequently discuss in recent years, in part due to the Falcons having some success and lack of success at various times. And this was a frequent topic of conversation coming off the heels of the 2019 season, is how much of their improvement, if they do wind up improving this year under Dean Pease, is due to actual improvement or just playing a weaker schedule. Like we saw this in the back half of 2019, that the Falcons kind of benefited from facing some shaky quarterbacks like Gardner Minshew and Kyle Allen and, a turnover-prone Jameis Winston in that second half of that season, as well as you can throw Jimmy Garoppolo in that mix. And how much of their defensive improvement in the back half of the season was due to facing lesser talent. And you look at, some of the quarterbacks and the murderer's row of wide receivers that they faced last year, like Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott and Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes and all these guys. And that led to some of the issues that the Falcons had on defense. And this year they're facing a lot more quarterbacks like Ryan Fitzpatrick and Daniel Jones. And while you face some very good wide receivers, particularly in the division, it's not sort of the murderer's row where every single week you got Devontae Adams, you got Tyreek Hill, you got Allen Robinson, you got DK Metcalf and Amari Cooper, et cetera, like we had last year. And so one does wonder if the improvement from the Falcons defense that they could or hopefully will show under Dean Pease, is that due to Dean Pease being this sort of magical better coach than what the Falcons have had previously, or are the Falcons benefiting from facing lesser competition? And that's the core issue when it comes to having a conversation about defense. Defense, you have to contextualize things because defense is not something where there's sort of one magic metric. Obviously, when we do condense things down, I tend to, look at things like Football Outsiders, DVOA metrics and whatnot. But, you talk about completion percentage. Again, that's a contextual thing. If you play a lot of zone, you're going to give up a higher completion percentage than you should, at least in theory, if you play a lot of man coverage. If the Falcons are playing a lot of bend but don't break style of defense, they can have a relatively high completion percentage, like 63, 64, 65%, and that will be an acceptable number, assuming that they can get stops on third downs, get stops in the red zone and whatnot. And potentially create turnovers and whatnot. So when it comes to defense, I tend to look at 6 broad categories. I've talked about this a ton on the podcast. This is something that the Falcons have used under Dan Quinn because this is something that Pete Carroll used in Seattle. And I think this is, you generally look at where teams rank in these metrics. You look at run defense, You look at pass rush. You look at your ability to limit big plays, 20-plus yard plays in the air primarily. Obviously, you also want to limit 20-plus yard plays on the ground. And your ability to generate big plays, which in the case of a defense is a turnover. And you also want to look at your efficiency on third downs and your efficiency in the red zone. And generally speaking, under the Dan Quinn era, they were typically good at not giving up big plays, but they were typically average to below average in the vast majority of those other categories, with a couple of exceptions, where in 2017 they were top 10 in red zone defense. And that was one of the reasons why for many, many years when Falcon fans insisted that the Falcons defense was, coming together and was on the verge of success, I was a little skeptical of that, because when you looked at sort of these broad categories, you saw what was an average to below average defense in most areas. And so that's part of the reason. Again, it's not my skepticism over Dean Pease is not because I doubt Dean Pease as a coach. I have just heard this song and dance so many times from Falcon fans over the years about how this new defensive coordinator, this new offensive coordinator is going to come in and magically fix all the Falcons' problems just through, the power of the magical wand, the elder wand, and wave it around and all the Falcons' problems will go away. And then when you're looking at these 6 broad categories, there's no sort of end-all be-all metric. Like, big plays allowed, obviously, that's pretty simple to measure. Third down efficiency, red zone efficiency, those are pretty easy to measure. But how do you measure run defense? Yards per carry is not necessarily a great way of measuring run efficiency because it's highly skewed by big plays. And so do you look at yards? Do you look at, DVOA? Do you look at adjusted line yards allowed from Football Outsiders, another metric that they use? Do you look at yards per carry, et cetera, success rate, all these various things? And so you kind of incorporate all, 4 or 5 different statistical measures in order just to get a overall picture of a team's run defense. How do you measure pass rush? Are you looking at sacks? Are you looking at pressures? All these various things. Quarterback hits, a more comprehensive look would incorporate all 3 of those things. When you look at turnovers, right? Like, you probably don't pay as much attention to fumbles and fumble recoveries because fumbles tend to be more a indicator of random chance and luck than necessarily, skill in general. So you pay a little bit more attention to interceptions, but there is a correlation between how many interceptions you generate versus how much pressure you generate. The more pressure you generate, the more likely it is for you to generate more interceptions. Again, it's not a huge, massive, overwhelming correlation, but it's a decent correlation there, in large part due to the more pressure you generate on the quarterback, the more prone the quarterback is to making questionable decisions, and the more prone he is to throw inaccurate passes, and that will increase the chances that defensive players will be able to pick passes off. So those are, all these various ways of measuring defense. So even though there's like 6 broad categories, when you break it down, there's like another, 15 ways of slicing defense. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Limley. But my expectation, hopefully the Falcons will, again, be in the 12 to 20 range or higher in as many of those categories as I've just discussed. So, in those 15 different areas that we look at the things, the more top 20 rankings, the more top 15 rankings that they have, the better will be an indicator that Dean Pease maybe did some good things. But again, that factor of competition does matter. It really does. Like, again, it's one thing when you're looking good against Drew Lock and Derek Carr than when you're playing against Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. It's 2 different, very different things. So our last question comes from Ish at Isaiah Ryan on Twitter, and he asks, why isn't Grady Jarrett a top 10 defensive lineman in Madden, since you love Madden ratings? And of course, for those who don't necessarily follow me on Twitter, or at least memorize my tweets on Twitter, I went on a little bit of a rant the other day talking about why isn't anybody upset about Julio Jones not getting the 99? Like, it seemed like people, was an annual crusade. And now, obviously I said that snarkily, understanding why exactly people have turned a blind eye on this issue that they were so willing to die on a hill for 7 years, but then suddenly just decided, you know what, I don't really care about that. And of course, we know the answer to that. Like, people only care about players and that play for their team. And it's one of those things where, like, for me personally, the Madden stuff is always funny to me. Because, like, for me, my perception of it, and again, you're more than welcome to disagree with me on this, but my perception of it is like at least 50%. I would bet good money that at least 50% of the people that complain about Madden ratings don't even play Madden. And for me, it's one of those things that is one of the most trivial things to complain about, because I think Grady Jarrett's probably, like, he wasn't in the top 10, but I think what I saw is like his grade would make him probably like 11th or 12th on the list. And so, like, is that a great miscarriage of justice? Not really. Like, do I think Grady Jarrett deserves to be higher on that? Sure. Do I know exactly what Madden's formula is for determining these things and whether, a bigger, more physical defensive tackle, unlike a Grady Jarrett, who's more of a penetrative type of player, would generally grade out higher on their ratings? I don't really care because I don't play Madden. I haven't played Madden for the better part of 15 years. So it's not something that I feel compelled to tweet about. And again, I think it's one of those things that a lot of people that tweet about it, I don't think they actually care either. Whether Grady Jarrett's an 88 or 89 versus a 92 or 93, does that really change your enjoyment of the game? Probably not. But we got to put on the cape. We got to put on the costume and we got to perform and say, oh my God, woe is me. And again, this is, you see this all the time with Matt Ryan. You saw this for 7 years where people sat here and insisted any time that someone did not have Julio Jones as the number one wide receiver in the league, this is a joke ranking. This is blah, 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 blah. And then the minute he's gone from the team, oh, he's washed. And so, like, to me, my rant, the core of my rant is like, that to me is being fake, right? That's what I mean where you're putting on a costume, you're performative. It's all performative. Like, you sit there and you pretend that, oh, this is some great miscarriage because you're just trying to get engagement, you're trying to get likes or whatever the case may be. You don't really care about this stuff. You don't really believe in this stuff because you wouldn't be able to turn off the switch. If you sat here for 7 years insisting that Julio Jones is the number one wide receiver, why would it matter whether or not he's wearing a red and black uniform or a light blue and dark blue uniform? Like, if you truly believe that, and like, that's my point, where it's just like, I get so tired of fans and this performative stuff, and particularly when it comes to rankings and particularly when it comes to Madden stuff. Like, who cares, man? Is the game worse because Grady Jarrett's rating is 3 points too low? Or would it be demonstrably better if it was 3 points higher? Right? It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't, but it is what it is. Fans are going to fan. And again, I'm not trying to tell people how to live their lives. If this is, the hill that you want to die on, then by all means die on that hill. But my point is more that I don't think many of you really actually care to die on the hill. You're just saying a thing because it sounds good. And this is why I have such an issue with it, is because, like, I tried to not be fake. Like, that to me is what it is. And, like, I've been sort of sitting on this thought process, for several weeks in large part in response to the Julio Jones stuff. And, I still haven't fully recovered from the complete 180 and fakeness, as I perceive it, from a lot of fans, that they completely did a 180. They spent 7 years saying one thing. And then the minute Julio Jones went on TV and said, look, I don't want to be an Atlanta Falcon, rather than sitting here saying, man, that sucks, but I still love you, my guy. It's like, no, he's washed, he's trash, he's not good anymore, we don't care about him. And, like, it's just like, for me, I just look at that stuff and I say, like, that means that you're being fake. I should take your opinion with a grain of salt because it's only based off of the color of a uniform. You don't actually believe what you're saying. Carl from the big bad bird, blog or whatever the case may be. And I hate if there's actually a website called the Big Bad Bird blog. I'll start it up if there is not one. But, again, part of my arrogance, part of my condescension when I say this, part of my ego when I say this, but, like, Carl from the Big Bad Bird blog is, out here being like, oh, Aaron, like, our opinions are equal. And it's like, no, they're not. Right? Again, part of my ego when I say this, but, like, if you're basing your opinion solely off of the color of a person's uniform and not, the content of their character, not the content of their ability and their skill set as a player, then, like, your opinion is not equal to mine. And again, I'm not saying that out of arrogance, but I sit here, like, this is why if you sit here and you say Aaron's so arrogant, Aaron's so condescending, Aaron's so egotistical and all these various things, is because, like, yeah, like, often I run across people that say things simply to say them because it's the thing to say. It's a performance of pretending to believe a thing in order to get likes, in order to get engagement. And to me, this Madden stuff, year after year, is like, it goes back similar to, again, I will stop rambling in a second, but it goes back to something that happened with the NFL Top 100. For me, back in 2013, when the Jacoby Jones was ranked in, like, 88th on the NFL Top 100 after coming off the heels of that Ravens Super Bowl. And I was like, Jacoby Jones, a top 100 player, he's like barely a fourth receiver in the NFL and he's a top 100 player. Come on. He's like one of the top 15 players in the NFL at his position group, largely due to his ability as a returner. Like that's ridiculous to me. And that was the point where I realized, the NFL Top 100 is a joke. And just because players vote for it doesn't mean that they're any more informed than your average fan. It's just the normal popularity contest and has no more value than any sort of, popular decision-making process when it comes to football, like the Pro Bowl and all these various things. And so I was like, this is something I don't care about. And I watched for years and years and years, fans continue to complain about, this player's not in the top. How does this player get snubbed in the top 100? With Falcon fans, always Falcon players. No one really cared about the Jaguars players or the Titans players or the Broncos players that got snubbed for understandable reasons. I get why, guys, but I'm just sitting here saying you don't really have a real opinion on this. You're just saying a thing because it sounds good, right? And so years and years later, I continue to see people complain about the NFL Top 100. And I would always just go haven't you guys realized that the NFL Top 100 is a joke? Stop paying attention. Stop giving it energy. Stop giving it attention. If something is a joke, something is a travesty, you stop paying attention, right? If you find someone, there's plenty of people out there that think, my opinions are a joke. My opinion, I'm the Skip Bayless of Falcons Twitter, as some people have, called me in the past. And right. And so guess what? They don't pay attention to what I say. And for me, why don't other people do that? If you've been complaining about Madden ratings for the last, 5 years, why are you still paying attention to Madden ratings? You don't care about it, right? I mean, you stop giving your energy. I don't give energy to Skip Bayless. I don't give energy to Clay Travis. It's I don't give energy to these things that I don't necessarily approve of or don't agree with or whatever the case may be. They are nothing to me. They don't exist in my worldview. And I don't understand why other people don't practice that, but instead, we got to put on the cape, we got to put on the costume and complain about, nobody respects us because, Grady Jarrett happened to be the 11th ranked defensive tackle instead of the 8th ranked, defensive tackle like he should have been, or the 5th ranked defensive tackle like he should have been. I've gotten in so many arguments about people, arguing over 2 spots on the rankings and be I remember years ago, this was maybe 2015, 2016, I put out my top 5 wide receivers and I had Mike Evans number 5 at that time. Which was relatively early in Mike Evans' career. I feel like, that's been proven in hindsight. But I remember someone jumping into my Twitter mentions and spending 20 minutes going back and forth with me about Mike Evans being ranked too high. And I was like, okay, clearly you think I'm overly high on Mike Evans, but where do you put Mike Evans? And he was like 7. And I was like, really? You spent 20 minutes of your life complaining about a guy being ranked 2 spots too high. This was something that you felt you needed to die on this hill. You needed to waste 20 minutes of your life. You're not going to get those 20 minutes back just because I had a guy 5 and you have him 7. This is what I'm talking about, guys. I do not understand why people have this amount of energy other than let me put on the cape, let me put on the costume, and let me perform. And this is why I just perceive a lot of this stuff to be fake. And again, from your average Falcon fan, it's not that big a deal. It's not something that is keeping me up at night. But when Carl from the Big Bad Bird blog that has a platform is basically doing that, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to feel some type of way about it because I'm going to have to spend my time and my energy dispelling this thing and going on a rant on a podcast or going on Twitter and being like, you're wrong and here's why you're wrong, X, Y, and Z, boom, boom, boom. Right. And then, of course, people are going to feel some type of way about it because, Aaron personally attacked me. No, I didn't. I basically just showed you that your opinion is dumb and stupid and wrong. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Do better. Right. Carl, do better. So that's how I feel about it. There's my rant. I'm done ranting about it. I just think Madden ratings to me are so the most overrated, overhyped, over complained about thing in the history of the world. Who cares? It's a video game, guys. It's a video game. Do you even play the game? And I bet you if you do play the game, you don't care. Is it going to stop you? Oh man, Grady Jarrett's 3 points too low. I'm not buying Madden this year. Solidarity with Grady Jarrett. And then next year, if Grady Jarrett happens to get traded, God forbid, but if he happens to get traded, you're not going to care that Grady Jarrett's an 88 or 89 or whatever he is in this year's Madden game. You're not going to care. You're going to be good riddance. He was overrated anyway. Blah, 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 it's just whatever, man. I do not get it, but I will, forever not understand. I just think, I know people are going to be like, this is fun, Aaron. We're just being fans and we're just doing the thing that we're supposed to do. And I just we normalize so much ridiculous and bizarre behavior just because we're all quote unquote fanatics and we're all insane. We're all crazy and we do ridiculous things. And it's why normalize this stuff, man? Just be a normal person. If you don't, I don't know, but there you guys have it. There's my rant. I'm done. Right. I will, let it go. I will, swallow it all down thanks to toxic masculinity for 6 months, and then it will explode in another and rants circa November, October. I'm good for one of these every 6 months because someone will know how to push my buttons. And I know, Isaiah, you know how to push my buttons. And I know, Isaiah, you're one of those people, and I know you're not one of these people. But you were one of those people that were one of the most prominent people that would always argue about why Julio Jones is great. And you have been one of the few people out there that I think has been truly shown integrity and honesty and haven't changed your opinion about Julio Jones just because he's not playing. So you're one of the good ones, in that regard, just because he's not playing for the Falcons. So, you are a small minority in the sea of non-crazy people out there that I just think it's ridiculous. But there you guys have it. I'm done ranting. It's over. If you want to provide your feedback to see if you can catch me slipping and ranting on a future episode, of course, you can hit me up on Twitter at LockedOnFalcons, on Facebook at LockedOnFalcons. You can send an email to LockedOnFalcons@mail.com. Of course, we'll be back with more of the latest news on what's going on in these opening days of Falcons training camp. We're just, a day or two away from actual practices that we can talk about and, who stood out and who's working with the first team at this position and all these various things. So we're getting ever closer to that day coming up here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. But as we get there, I want to help you guys make a little bit more money in the meantime. Maybe I should make a little bit more money so I'm not as prone to ranting about Falcon fans and what they tweet about in terms of Madden ratings. And, you can do so by checking out the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling of Paramount Sports. Get Lee's daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite, and Lee's lock of the day by following the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by betonline.ag, wherever you get your podcasts. Appreciate it, guys. Till then.
A big trade shakes up the NBA draft. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. Let's start in college football, where reports are that the SEC will meet on Thursday to discuss adding the Oklahoma Sooners and Texas Longhorns. Today on Locked On Sooners, USA Today's John Williams takes you inside the meetings that Oklahoma had with their current conference, the Big 12. The Green Bay Packers continue to try and persuade Aaron Rodgers to return to the team, reportedly coming to terms on a number of concessions meant to entice the reigning NFL MVP. Our local expert in Green Bay, Peter Bukowski, has that and the latest on talks with star wide receiver Davante Adams. The Memphis Grizzlies have moved up in the NBA draft, acquiring the 10th overall pick from the New Orleans Pelicans. For more details on the deal, listen to our local expert in Memphis, Sean Coleman, on today's Locked On Grizzlies podcast. And for full live coverage of the NBA draft, subscribe to the Locked On NBA YouTube channel and tune in to Locked On NBA Draft 2021 on July 29th. Local experts on the biggest stories. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Have you ever listened to a podcast like this one and you wanted to bring up your own point or just chat with other people that are listening at the same time? Well, let me tell you about Spotify Green Room. This is the first social audio platform made just for sports fans. The app is free to download, and once you're in, you can talk with us, other fans, athletes, insiders in real time about your favorite sport or team. Download the app, currently available on iOS devices. Create a profile, link your Twitter, join one of the groups for the latest league updates, and then you'll see us there. Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports.